Right, thank you for bearing with me, everyone, while I just sorted out some of the admin in the background. So hello and welcome to the Yuki Hub Crawl 2022. I'm Sam from Yuki, and I'll be your host for today's event. This is event number 7 out of 8 of the virtual tour that we're doing this year for the Hub Crawl. Our final date, which is a week today, same time, Tuesday at 4 o'clock on the 8th of March, we'll be looking at the future of esports. So if you want to find out more about that, go to yuki.org.uk. Event listing is all on there. Check out the Hub Crawl. You can also find all of the video footage and slides from previous Hub Crawl events on this year's tour. And I'm delighted to say we're going on the road, taking the Hub Crawl out and about around the UK when we get to April. So a chance to come and join us at some of those events and catch up with some of those people that we've not seen for quite some time. I'm delighted to announce that Barclays are our partner for the Hub Crawl, and I'll be bringing DG, David Gowans, forward in a second to come and do a short hello. As I mentioned, today's event is being recorded, a video link, and the slides will be sent to you in the next couple of days so that you can refresh and run through some of the material again and go into that detail a little bit more. We encourage you to ask any questions you have of our speakers today. The way to do that is to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type your question in. If you put it in the Q&A, the speakers will be able to have a look at those questions. I'll ask them at the end of their session, and then if they don't get to answer them, they'll deal with them in text afterwards. I'm also delighted to say that we're working today with two great organizations, Game Up, Gaming Analytics Meetup, and also the Institute of Directors ERP Digital Special Interest Group. And we're going to hear from those representatives throughout the course of this afternoon's session. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome David to come and join me. David, where are you? Ah, there you are.
Afternoon, Sam.
How are you doing? You all right?
I'm good. I can't believe this is the penultimate hub crawl, virtual hub crawl of the year.
Which has been your favourite one so far, or is it this one? Is this going to be your favourite?
The ones that I'm on, Sam. This is my second. But no, for us, as Barclays, we are deeply invested in helping support and help the industry grow with kind of business building programs and helping address some of the I guess some of the problems or some of the activity that organizations are butting up against as they continue to move forward with their vision. So it's really fantastic to be able to sponsor this. Again, looking forward to today and seeing some of the insights that come out ourselves at Barclays, also seeing the incredible growth that happens within the games industry. We put out a press release last year. We've got a follow-up coming shortly around just the spend and activity that's happening in games. It feels like there's never been a better time to be a gamer, to be in the games business, and just the amount of creativity that comes from the sector is just incredible. So we look forward to watching this next session and all of our activity we'll do moving forward. If you want to get in touch or find out about what Barclays are doing in supporting the games industry, please come and visit us at games.barclays or at our @Barclays Games Twitter and LinkedIn. And we've got some details of some business building events and activity that we are doing over the next few weeks. But Sam, I guess I'll turn my camera off and be part of the audience for this one, and I'm sure I'll have a new favorite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for joining us and your continued support. It's greatly appreciated. Not allowed to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. When we go out on the road, using some of the Barclays venues and them enabling us to keep the events free and spend a bit of money on some entertainment, some food and drinks, always most welcome, just to make those events go with a bang. So thank you.
Absolutely. Excited for them.
Wonderful. And as David leaves us, I'm going to invite Una to come forward and give us a short introduction, a short welcome on behalf of Game Up. Hello there.
Hi, hello. Hi. Right, give me 2 seconds.
I'm going to turn my camera off and let you know when you're good to go. So.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, guys, I think you can probably see my screens with notes, which wasn't my intention, but anyway, we're gonna
It's
start
nice and
with that
clear though.
one.
Thanks, Una. All over
Is
to you.
it?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
wonderful.
Okay,
Thank you.
fantastic. Thanks. Right. So, I'm just going to start with what I'd normally finish with, which is the thank yous. I'm going to be reasonably brief as well because you know, we really want to get into the main content of the event. But I really did want to say thank you to Sam and Yuki for allowing us to be part of the Hub Crawl series, and I also want to say thank you to Dave and Barclays for the sponsorship, to the IOD for the collaborative support they've offered, in particular Simon and Joel Singh, who chairs one of the special interest groups, and to the speakers for all giving their time, because they're all volunteers and part of the community that we're trying to build, and to you, the audience, for taking time out from your busy days to actually spend a bit of time with us. So, on that note, has my screen moved forward, Sam?
Yeah, it has. Yep, we can see a running order there. Thank you.
Brilliant, fantastic. That's one of the other challenges, that it doesn't always move forward. So the running order. So there'll be a brief intro from me around Game Up, which will go directly into a primer from Peter around the value of analytics and what analytics can bring to the world of video games. We're aware that people in the room are at varying levels of understanding around analytics, and whilst we do the more technical presentations, we've tried to make sure that we've pitched it to the right level for the audience that we've got on this call. As I say, we do the deep tech, so we can get more into that in other events if we hook up again. We've got Simon, who's absolutely amazing. So he's going to talk about the value of good data practice. Simon's an absolute legend, so I would take notes of anything that he wants to share with us today. And then we've got Chris and Marco, who are working in sort of esports and gaming arenas, who've got some really interesting insights to share from their experiences. So let's move the screen on. Okay, so you don't really need to know about me. I'm one of the founders. There is another guy, Christoph, who you may meet later on if you join the social. And there's Peter and a few other people in the background who have helped us over the years and who've been part of making this community, really, really worthwhile. So Game Up, which is kind of the real sort of reason for us here. It's not really a business. It's not even a brand. It was a community event. As you can see from the earlier logo, it's just an amalgamation of the gaming analytics meetup wording. It just seemed like a clever idea to sort of call it Game Up, but it's actually a community built around data analytics and data science, and it's really aimed at professional development and social, and really just kind of helping those who might be either new to the industry or those with experience in the industry, who might want to help shortcut some of the obvious challenges that different people face in this space. So we really wanted to create an environment that people were willing to cross-talk and to sort of share what's going on in their world, and that could be from a variety of perspectives. It could be the tech challenges, it could be talent drain, it could be anything. Currently lives on the Meetup platform, so if you want to find us, that's where we are currently housed, or you can come directly to myself or Peter through Acumed, which is our consultancy business that sits in the background, but Game Up is separate from that. One of the reasons I approached Yuki earlier this year is because many of you may well be aware of a Supercell event that took place in November of last year. It was in collaboration with Dane Studios and the Helsinki Data Science Meetup. But the thing that really struck me was the number of attendees that were at that event. So, they definitely had over 1,000 people registering. At least 1,000 were on LinkedIn when I was watching the event, and over 500 attendees, 100 of which were on site, and another 400 were dialing in. So there must be an opportunity there. There must be an appetite for people who want to understand more about the data analytics space and how to work in it and how to get the benefit from it. So yeah, hopefully part of this sort of Game Up initiative can help to build that kind of dialogue. Now, our existing membership is about 200 people. It's all free. Nobody charges. Nobody's really sort of driving any business from it. It is purely a community type of event. So these Wordles are just a sort of quick headline of the membership when they're asked what levels your understanding. So we've got scientists, intermediate, good, studying, so a whole range of attendees. And when they were asked what would make the meetup useful, it is networking, talks, knowledge sharing, insights, that kind of thing. So the kind of things that we've touched on already. So what do we need from you guys? If you're interested, if anything that I've said has resonated with you today, in order to give Game Up or a version of Game Up more body, more legs, we need more speakers, we need venues, we need to build advocacy around it as being a useful thing to do. And we're looking for ideas around what would make it useful for the community. And in that context, I'm incredibly grateful to Yuki and the IOD for helping to make that a thing. If you want to catch up with us later, if you've got any more questions, either technical or non-technical, or just want to socialise, there's an alternate Zoom, which we can share the link for. Hopefully, we'll see you later. And on that note, I shall hand over to Peter.
Hello, hello. I just had a side note from some people trying to get in as well, saying that they couldn't. So Sam, if there's anybody trying to join lobbies, just a note there. Hi, I'm Peter. I'm going to share my screen. Only host who can share. Here we go. Hold shift, only want one window. Is that working?
Yeah, looks perfect, thank you.
Lovely. So we can skip the first one and the second one. This is just a quick primer looking at analytics, areas where analytics are used and the value of analytics. And as we proceed through the following slides, we kind of fill in a bit of a picture around actually a number of areas where analytics show demonstrable value. And at the tail end of this deck, there's a whole section. It's a bit small to go through and large to go through, but kind of identifies different areas of business and how they fit. So a bit about me. My background is distributed computing, machine learning, and solving problems at scale. 9 years ago, I'm in my 10th year now, working with Riot. I moved into games from a security and fraud research and graph analytics background. I'm an advisor to the Institute of Directors ERP Digital Special Interest Group and a member of Yuki as well. And so I'm kind of fascinated with lots of elements of analytics, visualizations, telling stories, and I was looking at how to better support people in analytics. So this slide, we're going to look at value. The TLDR for that is informed decisions is better than the alternatives, typically, from my perspective. And we're going to look at the mobile app model, a very brief look at kind of the pirate metrics with an exceptionally bad joke that's in there. I'd forgotten the bad joke until I reread that particular slide. And then some of the pitfalls in building data science analytics programs and what mature platforms look like. So a very kind of simplistic, straightforward model of a mobile app from the Lean Analytics book, but I thought that it applied quite well as a high-level overview. I'm aware that we've got a mixed audience, probably of analytics business folk, and so it felt probably worth going through very briefly where you've got a store, you purchase, you download, you install, and then you've got play. So a purchase may be a revenue play, and purchasing skins may be revenue. There's a cycle around interaction down there in terms of you're not always hyper engaged, and churn and retention starts to come in. And then you've got more on the kind of virality side of the reviews that are coming in, marketing. Actually, some of the awareness and intent kind of is more over onto that left-hand side with esports and user acquisition processes that are a part of that. And then we're beginning to have some special labels associated with specific metric names, so average revenue per user. And then publishing, marketing activities, awareness and intent, so all concepts that are critical in gaming. And the esports is a kind of an adjacent. The games are becoming an entertainment in their own right. This raises both awareness of the game, but it also gives another reason to get involved in games. There are careers. Even if you're not the best esports player, you could be an influencer who plays games frequently and entertains well enough. So there's an entertainment business, an esports business that sit adjacent that we're also involved in. So you can already see that there's a large picture of quite complex pieces, and there are lots of opportunities for kind of A/B testing and different analytics at each phase of that we come back to. Here's the bad joke. What is a pirate's favorite letter? And this comes from the Dave McClure's paper looking at pirate metrics. Pirate metrics, because of the leading letters, are R. But looking at, and we'd often put awareness and intent these days, perhaps before some of these on the marketing side, but acquisition and the activation, retention, revenue, referrals. A pirate's favorite letter is not R because it's the C they love, for anybody who needs the joke. This was one of the things that kind of brought me into building the game analytics group, in that retention curves, bog standard area, but I was working and looking at one game, and we were looking at launching it, and I didn't really know what good would look like. This data has all been generated. And so what does good look like? Which is when I started reaching out to my friends, colleagues in other organizations to go, what does this look like? There are some pieces now that are published in some of the data platforms that will give a feel, and has really helped me to understand different genres, different styles, different lengths of games. Some will grow because of virality, some will grow because of stickiness. Moving on to kind of some of the pitfalls. I've seen a lot of data projects over the years. There are lots of steps where we can get things slightly misaligned. Now, this particular model came out of some research work that Una was doing, working with people across the video games industry. I think I often find myself working in the spaces of, are we asking the right questions? Do we have sufficient storytelling and visualization skill? And do we have the sufficient analytics craft? But I've also seen projects which get reprioritized in terms of business, or there isn't a consistent desire to focus and push through until you find the value, or likewise that there are technical things that mean that there's a focus that drifts and moves on. That's the wrong way. We mentioned platform in the previous section. Games environments can be quite complex. There are lots of different data sources. Digital first, big games, vast quantities of events potentially, and data priv is fundamental to be designed in at each transformation, ideally from the very beginning. It's much easier than trying to retrofit. Good privacy starts to create good trust generally good in an environment, and project success of being able to get good quality information into lots of hands to inform lots of decisions. Informed decisions are better than the alternatives. I think, in fact, I know that I have provided exceptionally good return on investment this year as a data scientist and analyst, probably 5 times my cost. So it's definitely worthwhile. The mature platform here, the other kind of footnote in there is that one of the pitfalls is that it can be quite easy for a data and analytics group to go for data, to become the access to data routes. That piece of having reproducible reporting, standardized metrics, enables you to compare with history, but also enables your analysts time to kind of dig into potentially more interesting, more valuable problems as time goes on. So as you mature, make sure that you are servicing business needs in ways that are easily reproduced and ideally automated, with good privacy designed in from the very beginning. That also enables you to start doing the A/B testing. If we do A and have a control group associated with on, what of these things work, and start to try those all the way through to start understanding what do players like, what do players want, how do we influence that, and what actions can we take that lead to better outcomes for us. I'm not going to go through that. This is my last slide, but it's a quick overview of all the different parts in game organizations that will touch analytics as a group, with some of the areas in which they operate. And that's it for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Peter. Quite a lot of comments on your pirate joke, as you can imagine, or lack of joke, as you were kind of pitching it. It's interesting, your style for delivery. I did like that. Do you want to stop sharing your screen for a second, and then you can join me in full Technicolor? That would be amazing. Thank you. Ah, wonderful. It's interesting. Your background's interesting. You come from outside the games industry, then coming into a business like Riot. What do you think? Do you think the games industry fully understands the role that data and analytics can play within some of their day-to-day work? Why can't we hear you? What's going on there?
Yeah, yes, fundamentally. I think digital-first organizations understand it. My experience has often been drowning in lots of data and potentially trying to identify the thing that will create the most value now. So there's a kind of symbiotic, this is the information that we've currently got, how do we use it best, and how do we get to the point where if my analyst tells me something, I can actually action it. So we can tell you lots of things, but the business needs to be able to action it. And so there are some things that strategically you can get to having the lever that you can pull to make the thing happen. And there are things for which you already have the levers that you can pull. And so that's why I say you have to work very well with stakeholder management, with expectations, and work through the pieces that are going to deliver the most at the moment. And it grows and it builds trust. So
it's that fundamental difference, I suppose, between sort of data and insight, which is generally how we refer to it. I think when you've got that interpretation of the data is really important, and what you can actually do with it.
It is, yeah.
Do you find yourself feeling under pressure that management is expecting you to know all the answers all the time?
I don't, and I think a lot of data science conferences have moved into data-driven decisions, and in a creative world, we have moved much more to data-informed as the phrase, in that there's a critical creative step that humans are uniquely very good at, and that you don't have all of the answers, and there's an intuitive leap that is still needed, that needs people who are well informed doing them, and trying to get more people informed about the things that they're doing is generally I think, better. We make better choices.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. If there's any questions from the audience for Peter or for in fact, please feel free to just type them in the Q&A. They'll keep an eye out for them and answer them as we go. So thank you very much, Peter. And as you take a step back, I'm going to welcome forward Simon Honey. Hello, Simon.
Hi. How are you doing, Sam?
Do you know, I'm very well. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you. Have you put your suit on especially for today's event? That is delightful if you have.
No, my next meeting.
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm not going to ask you about your next meeting. I'm
No.
interested in what you've got to say now about cybersecurity and data protection. So I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll share my screen now. Hopefully you can, 1 second. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see your slides. Full
Brilliant.
Technicolor. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. I was asked by Uno and Peter to talk about data privacy, data protection, because in my past lives, I've helped companies, particularly software companies, understand that they've got a lot of data and they don't know how to protect that data, either from eavesdropping or from hackers, but also from legislation. And there's legislation coming in all the time now, making it far more serious if you get things wrong. So if you go for my slides initially, that's just me, but I'll ignore that for now. Right, this is from the ICO. That obviously data is everywhere. You can't live without data. And more people are getting very concerned that their data is going to be misused, either for illegal purposes or for trying to sell you stuff. And the ICO is getting a little bit concerned that people aren't taking sufficient protection to enable the data subject or the customer to actually feel as though their data's not going to be misused. So we produced a document called Data Protection Act in 2018. And actually, if you look at it, it says personal data means really everything. It refers to a person's address, age, his identity, location, his mental ability, practically everything about that person. But it even includes things like cookies and IP address, which means that you as a provider of data or user of data must make sure that the cookies are protected. You're going to have to ask each person their permission to use their data and so forth. So let's go through this slide. This is the Data Protection Act. It's really pretty simple. I helped write this act many years ago, and I'm a firm believer in keeping things very simple. So the UK Data Protection Act says, keep it simple to withdraw consent for the use of personal data. Companies must ask people to ask for their personal data held, and service can be held and also can be erased easily. Prior to this, companies would store personal data and never let the customer erase it. It's now an act that says you must let them erase it. If you don't, you'll get heavily fined. Obviously, a lot of gamers are designed for kids, so enable parents and guardians to give their consent for their child's data to be used. And the fifth one, probably most important as far as I'm concerned, about IP addresses, internet cookies, and DNA. Because DNA is specifically important for the medical fraternity, where they like to know the information of every single patient and to be shared around, but they can't. It must be anonymized data, so it can't get back to the original data subject. The key points to the UK Data Protection Act, which, as I said, came in 2018, which was a follow-on from the EU GDPR, which basically they're one and the same now, but shortly the Data Protection Act will go different from GDPR because we aim to be having a better security aspect, better protection for the individual, and also my last slide will go into criminal actions. But currently, Data Protection Act, legal basis of processing, pretty obvious, lawful, specific reason, adequate, accurate, limited time scale, security, which is very important, and accountability. So if you hold that data, you have to know why you hold that data on that person, what's going to be used for, how long you're going to have it for, can it easily be moved to another supplier? It goes on and on and on. And also the individual's rights and consent has to be in there. So access, rectification, allowing the use to be forgotten. But one of the big areas is what people may have heard of is subject access requests. That means if a client or a data subject asks you what information you have on them, you are legally obliged to apply within 1 month, giving them every bit of information you have on them. Any other information must be redacted, but you have to give them back that information within 1 month. If it's a lot of data, you can get up to 3 months, but if you don't, you'll be fined. And surprise, surprise, the UK government were fined that this particular thing, when they didn't reply to customers quickly enough on their data. I'll go later on in this presentation, I'll give you the actual money that you find they had. Security data, incredibly important. Normally people think, oh yes, we'll encrypt it at rest, but also during transmission. So with anywhere within your organization, if you're using personal data, it must be encrypted. So only the people who can the network people and so forth can actually unencrypt it. Anybody else can't, like admin people, HR, and so forth. Backup security is paramount. So when you back up your data, it also must back up all the personal data. And last, what happens if things go wrong? You are obliged within 72 hours to inform the ICO, which is the Information Commissioner's Office, which is an independent government-run department, which will actually see if you are breaking any rules. And they're the ones who will fine you if you are breaking rules. Now, examples of personal data breach include access by an authorized third party, which is very common nowadays, deliberate or accidental action, sending personal data to incorrect recipient by accident or deliberately, computer devices containing personal data being lost or stolen, which does happen a lot. You may have heard of things like people leaving laptops on trains, alteration of personal data without the person's permission, and loss of availability of personal data. All these things will get you to be fined, but more importantly, your reputation will be ruined because the ICO will publish your name so everyone can see that you're breaking the law. In order to get around that, companies must have a data protection policy. And these will include things like your data principles, your lawful basis of processing, why you want to process it, how long you're going to keep it for, whose information you're going to hold. It also has to have all the contracts with clients and suppliers. So if you're going to allow your suppliers to access this data, you must have contracts in place, making them also protect their data by encryption. You must also have the rights of data subjects clearly identified within your area. So if a client logs on, they can see that you are protecting people's data. You must also have what's called data privacy by design. That means if you're designing a new application or a new way of doing things, you must think first, where does the data privacy come into the equation? It can't be an afterthought. It must be done from inception. And also there must be what's called an impact assessment. So if things go wrong, what's going to happen if a data does breach out? Then you must have data breach management procedures. These are pretty obvious to say, if I do lose some data, what do I do? Do I contact the whole company? Do I contact the CEO? Do I have to contact the ICO or whatever? These must all be written up and laid down, because if you do have a breach, the first thing the ICO will say is, I want to see your data protection policy. Has it been signed off by the powers to be, your board or whatever? Has your clients or your data subjects, have their data been protected? In your cookies, does it say that you can either store all the data, but or you can only store strictly necessary data, but it must be up to your data subject to agree to this. If you have these in place, your fine will be much reduced. And I'll go later on to say how this has happened to other companies. Now, you may have heard of GDPR. I'm sure you have done. It's one of the European standard for data protection. And you may have heard of the UK DPA, which both came into play in 25 May 18. But since then, the whole world's taken off, and all the other countries are taking similar views on how to protect personal data, ranging from various states in America, California, Colorado, Virginia. They're very similar to the GDPR with slight different nuances. You've now got similar work going in Brazil, Canada, South America, Thailand, South Korea, Australia, Japan. It goes on and on. But they're all doing the same kind of thing. Protecting personal data is more important than the company's profits. Currently, there are now 10 countries with top data privacy laws. Australia, Canada, Denmark, France, so forth. But Iceland is called the Switzerland of data. They've got very strict laws to protect their data, and companies really have to take note, because the penalties are quite draconian. There are currently now more than 120 countries already engaged in some form of international privacy law, and it's growing day by day. Looking at comparing different countries' privacy laws, if you look at it like UK and the total scope, UK covers the whole world. So the transmission of data out of this country is equally protected as it is transmitted within the country. Same thing for EU. For California, pretty much the same. Brazil the same. And South Africa, slightly different, restricted to organizations that are either based or process personal data in South Africa. So it's more restricted. You look at mandatory responses for requests for information, most of them like 1 month. Brazil, 15 days, which is quite tight. Now, one thing the ICO I'd like companies to have is a data protection officer, someone who's responsible for looking after data within the organization and also clients' data. And certainly if you are a council or a government department, you have to have a named DPO. And nowadays, most big companies also have quite a few DPOs to make sure they are fully compliant. Breach notification, if we do have a breach, 72 hours normally. Some countries are as soon as practically possible. Now it comes to breaches. With UK and Europe, you've got quite a hefty thing, 4% of global annual revenue for every breach. or 17.5 million or 20 million euros, depending which is the higher. Quite bad. California is much lower, but for each incident, so each incident for each person. So if a company had breaching it for, let's say, 10,000 people, it's 10,000 times $7,500, quite a lot. I think probably South Africa's the most radical, saying that you face 10 years in prison for breaching personal data. Now, when companies fail to comply, what happens? These are the biggest GDPR fines to date. Amazon, WhatsApp, Google, Facebook, all had fines on cookie consent. They then asked the user, are they allowed to use their personal data? And they got fined heavily, 746 million pounds. It's a lot of money. Okay, if Amazon may be a small speck in the ocean, but it's going to mount up. And certainly in Europe and America, they're looking at the big companies because they're the ones who have to make the radical decisions. But even like BA, you may have heard BA in 2018 had a huge breach, and they let 400,000 customers there to be hacked into, giving details of their payment cards, the travel's name and addresses. Now, originally, the ICO wanted to fine BA £238 million. But BA immediately informed the ICO that they had a breach, and they had very good policies in place. So when the ICO investigated the breach, why it happened, they could actually reduce the fine to 10% of it because they had good policies in place, and also they didn't hide the fact they had a breach. Similarly of Marriott's, when they bought Sharwood, another hotel chain, they revealed the reservation, the database of all the reservations for years. Yet again, Marriott's were going to be fined 123 million pounds, but it got down to, euros down to 20.4 million because they had decent policies in place. With the ICO, the UK enforcement agency, they started off looking at the fines for direct marketing, in marketing their customers for a lot of information, and they didn't get permission of the customers. Would you allow them to be receiving market information? You may have seen recently, a lot of companies are now asking customers that because of the fines. And you may mention, I mentioned before about the Ministry of Justice, who actually contravened the articles of both EU and UK in not responding to data subjects' requests. They had an enforcement notice, which was highly embarrassing for them. And the last one here, I think is quite interesting, is the UK Cabinet Office breached GDPR by disclosing the postal addresses of the 2020 News Honours recipients online. And they got breached, they got fined £500,000 for that. They should have known better. And it gets worse as now, because the UK Prime Minister has now said that not only will people get fined, there'll also be new criminal offences, which could ultimately end up in jail if you do breach data protection laws unnecessarily. And I know that by the end of this year, there'll be new act or addition to Data Protection Act coming in for about transferring data overseas, because the UK government's looking at how to protect personal data going between countries who may not have similar protection mechanisms. That's the end of my presentation. I hope you've liked it, and I'm free to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Simon. Excellent stuff. If you can close your slides down,
I'm
we'll see
trying to
you.
do that now.
Wonderful. We'll see you in all your glory. Now, this was a fascinating talk and some really good insight there on some pretty fundamental things that companies have to do. But there
Is
must
it
be
working now or not? Sorry, I can interrupt you.
No, I can still see your slides,
Oh,
actually.
sugar. Oh, that's better.
No,
No.
you need to stop screen sharing. It's at the top. I can stop it for you.
You do, please. Yeah, thank you.
There we go. I
Brilliant,
brought
thank
you
you.
back. Yeah, brilliant. So a couple of things that jumped out at me there. Firstly, some really important regulations there that people have to be aware of. If we think that some of the companies here today joining us are small and medium-sized businesses, all looks pretty onerous on small businesses. What's your view on that? I mean, it certainly looks like the larger companies have been the ones that have been taken to task on this, but
Yeah.
It's quite a challenge for small companies, wouldn't you say?
Well, I mean, first of all, this presentation is my view. It's not the view of the government or the ICO, even though I do work for them. I've actually worked for small companies, very small ones of 50 to 100 people strong. And it's not onerous. It's onerous if things go wrong. But if you actually have in place some sensible policies, they don't have to be long. I wrote one for a small company and it was 10 pages long. Very simple, what they do, how to protect a person's data, how do they report it if it goes wrong, making sure their cookie policy is up to date and allowing customers to actually choose what data they wish to give the company. It's very easy. The bigger the company, more difficult it is because they like to transmit the data to all the rest of their subsidiaries. And so therefore it's much more complex. For small companies, it's actually easy. And we're talking about companies like a small choir or a church sending information to its parishioners. It's very simple to do. There's some very good guidelines issued by the ICO in how to protect your data. It doesn't take long. It takes about an hour to understand what your objectives are and what your requirements should be, to register yourself with the ICO saying you are data protection officer or data controller. It's not, to me, okay, I live and breathe this subject all the time, but I've actually been with small companies who are terrified, and I come out of it last 2 hours later, it's done. It's not difficult. It's only difficult if you try and hide your data.
It's interesting, and you've listed a long list of major corporations there, large companies. I can see the problem with that, with the amount of data that they've got, and certainly that customer engagement activity. What happens to when they get fined? Where does the money go, just out of interest? Do we know?
The money does not go to the government. It goes to the ICO and also helps them improve their enforcement, employing more people to protect the data, and also looking at ways to actually get better understanding. So as you said, we are looking at trying to enhance the transmission data overseas.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
takes time and money. It means flying out to different countries and so forth. But the money does not go to government. It stays in the ICO.
It's interesting.
As far as I know.
No, well, that's fine. That's all right. I'm not going to get you under, declaring all of this stuff yourself. A really interesting question from A in the chat, talking about is there any way of evaluating how much damage was prevented due to the regulations? It's a really interesting idea because this is not a fundraiser. This is a genuine, serious consideration to protect people's identity and personal information. Has anyone ever done any estimates to show what the sort of the value of that savings would be of the work?
It's very hard to actually monetary savings, but there has been a lot of studies. Okay, it's been going since 2018. It's really kicked off big time 2020-21. That's when most of the fines have taken place. And yes, there are studies going ahead now to see how much data have we saved, how much we saved as monetary contribution. But monetary is always It's not actually the question monetary. How much data have we saved people being indoctrinated by unnecessary bombardment of the information? As I showed you before, a lot of companies have been fined for unsoliciting sending of data to customers. Some, some was 500,000 times in 1 year. That's a lot of data being sent to customers. And it's actually helped people not have a huge inbox of wasteful data, wasteful emails. So in that respect, it's helped customers feel that they're more control of their data now.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Thank you very much for that, Simon. There's a question in the Q&A for you to type an answer to if you can.
I will do.
A really interesting question about looking at data moving between different countries. So
that's a huge topic, I warn you.
Well, that's why I'm not asking you the question now. I mean, this would be a 20-minute answer. I'll leave you to type the answer in that. Thank you very much, Simon. Cheers.
Bye.
And as Simon steps away, delighted to welcome Christopher Ling forwards. Hello, Chris. How are you doing? You all right?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks very much.
Now, you said earlier you had 250 slides to get through. Have you been able to cut them down in the last 10 minutes? Are you?
We'll all be A/B testing experts at the end of this.
Wonderful. I can see your slides now. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so today I'm covering A/B testing at Colibri Games, more particularly about automating A/B testing and the way we do it. I'm going to be starting from kind of the beginning, and feel free to leave questions if you have any in the Q&A section. I'm going to go pretty quick. I do have a lot of slides, but I'll make it as dynamic as I can. So let's see here. Yeah, so I'll give you a quick introduction to A/B testing. I know there's a very level of understanding of what we're going on here, and A/B testing sometimes seems like a magic bullet that solves all your problems. Unfortunately, it's not that, but I will give you a definition of what we're talking about here. So data is the information you have about your players or whatever, as mentioned in the previous discussion. It's just information, right? It's up to you how to use it. You can use it to generate metrics or KPIs to understand how you fit within an industry, or you can also use it for something like inference, or statistical inference is the word we would be using, which is a category of mathematical techniques for logical analysis. A good example of what I mean by data is every time someone watches an ad, that's some data. You have some data, you know they watched an ad. What do you do with it? Well, you try to count how many times they watch an ad. That's a metric. And then if you wanted to A/B test something, comparing two groups on how many times they watch an ad on average by changing the button color, for example, that would be statistical inference. Definition of statistics, like just to give you an idea of what that word statistics is, a bit magical term sometimes, but it's not so complicated. Typically in the games industry, you'll see it in two places: significance testing and prediction and modeling, or other words, machine learning. What we're talking about today is significance testing, the difference between two groups of people. The reason why we do that is statistics in general is because it's impossible in a lot of cases to observe the real truth. The only way to know it is to use an estimate of some kind. An example I like to use is if you wanted to know how many people in the world have brown hair, the easiest and most accurate way to do it would be to count every single human being on the planet with brown hair. No one is insane enough to do that. So what we instead do is we just estimate it. Now, how this applies to A/B testing and tests in general is that we recognize the fact that it's impossible to test something against everybody on the planet. So what we actually want to know is how would someone react to version A? In addition, how would that same person react to version B without knowing about version A? We can't really erase people's memory, so we have to test two versions with two different people. The goal of A/B testing is to apply that learning, even though you're taking two different people and showing two different versions to two different people, and generalize it as much as you can to your whole population of people or your players in the case of gaming, right? If you do it correctly with the right techniques, you can generally do this. And that's kind of where the power of A/B testing happens. So I'm going to give you a rundown of what we do at Colibri Games and how we kind of get around the how we automate it in a lot of ways, but also how we do it here. We do refer to A/B testing as significance testing, so in case that was confused. So just to give you an idea of why that's important, and we talk about significance testing in particular. An A/B test is basically about quantifying the likelihood that your findings are true. Whereas if you just compare two numbers, you would not necessarily have a certainty around it. Here's a visual example. These are two exactly the same numbers. With a group comparison, where you're just talking about looking at a KPI, you can actually observe a difference between these two groups. But if you account for things like variance or error within, let's say, a sample of groups, or you have a range of being wrong. And in the case of here, what we see in the A/B test is sometimes those ranges of being wrong can overlap, and actually there's no difference at all. That's what you're controlling for when you do an A/B test. So when you use an A/B test, just a couple rules of thumbs that we like to use here is if you are uncertain about the effect or change, or you're deciding between two competing changes, you can do an A/B test. If you favor safety over speed, you can do an A/B test. And if you can't, ignore the last sentence, that's an unimportant thing. In general, you can do simple group comparisons as well, so to do things, but anyway. So our A/B testing process, to run you through it, is we have a kind of this set of phases. As you can see, and actually Peter mentioned it before, you spend most of your time defining a good question. And as you can see, over half of our process is defining a good question. The definition of an A/B test. Our first step here is we try to define our hypothesis statement. You'll hear this in online and if you read blogs and stuff like that. Calculate sample sizes, et cetera, et cetera. And what we decided to do is we tried to create a template for it. So we want to first have everyone think about what kind of goal they desire from an A/B test. We want players to do such and such because this, and we want this kind of KPI to move. So typically you would do something like, we want players to click on this button because this button is cooler and resulting in more higher purchase revenue for that item or something like that. Or you can do it via retention or joy or whatever. We also talk about like the area of focus, right? The area of focus would be things like, what are we actually trying, what kind of behavior we want to influence, right? And sometimes it's purchase behavior. Sometimes you will change a button for purchase behavior, or sometimes you'll do it just because you want players to see something. You want them to see a feature, a cool new thing that you built and put in the game. Of course, at the end of the day, we do make games as a business. It's not done for free. And we do also want to make sure that it has a business impact, of course. So we often rephrase the goal and the area of focus into a business hypothesis. It makes it easier to sell something to a stakeholder or a party with financial interests, say. And of course, the business hypothesis also has a template. So we predict that so-and-so, what change for player groups, for which player groups will achieve what kind of effect for what reason. We will do this, we'll know this is true when we see a certain KPI move in a particular direction by a certain amount. And actually, this is where we first run into automation. We actually did this template because if you know all of these things, in general, you can automate an A/B test. So there we go. Oh, that's supposed to be hidden. And there is, this is a quote from Albert Einstein, again, to reiterate why we spend so much time on the question asking process. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes to determine the proper questions to ask, by Albert Einstein. And that is the base principle behind automation. So it's actually not so much automation. You're spending most of your time as human beings to ask the right question. So a little guide on on choosing what to measure, right? How can you know that the changes in the game actually worked? So in general, we actually typically at Colibri Games use day X LTV, or customer lifetime value, because for the most part, this is the measure that we're most interested in. We don't, we do want them to play the game for longer. We do want them to spend more money, but kind of how they do it is up to the player. So last but not least, the last step we do is a sanity check. This sanity check is just to make sure, and one thing about A/B tests is you can do a lot of them, and if you automate all of them, you don't necessarily remember the ones you've done in the past. It's important to take a step back and remember, did I do this already? Because sometimes you did an A/B test and you learned a lesson, but you didn't take it forward, or you lost it somehow, or maybe people left since then and they are the ones who learned that lesson. Make sure that you don't repeat yourself. Now, we know kind of the basic questions that we use to define an A/B test. That's the ones that we use here. And I know I'm talking a bit quickly and I'm being conscious of time, so feel free to ask any further questions later. But I wanted to make sure that I get through all of this. So what I'm going to do is show you kind of an experiment setup that we do here. We automate the A/B testing as much as possible using the templated questions you saw earlier. This allows us to easily set up new tests and draw conclusions as quick as possible so that analysts don't have to spend time just saying, is A better than B or B better than A? In particular, what we do is we set up all of these phases here in the actual player experience, and we launch subsets of this data. Sorry, let me rephrase that. So what we typically do is we set up all of that stuff in our data platform, and we execute it with with the right sampling strategy. So just a couple of things to note: we always have a control and at least one change implemented on the client to compare against the current state of the game. Right, and we typically use a sample size of at least 3,000 users per group. Typically, this is new users or DAO, can be quantified either way. We also try to time limit the test so that we don't spend forever with an A/B test. If you time limit it correctly, you can actually make sure that your sample size is achieved, but also that you're not over testing a bit or having the test go too long, and making sure that you make a decision in a timely manner. So A/B testing, just to give a little bit of jargon translation for you, A/B testing refers to specifically an experiment that tests a group A, your control, against a group B. You can also have multivariate tests, which is A, B, C, D tests, or whatever you want to call them. But typically what we will do in general is we always try to do A/B tests only. So you're only testing one variant. What is your control and what is your variant? We also need some information to determine statistical significance. So here's some guidelines. Basically, do you want to know if there's any difference, if the difference is greater than or less than? You'll see 0.05 as a significance criteria across the internet. It's just a simple flat number. Don't worry about it too much. That's just the number that they typically use. And I won't explain that in this call, in this presentation. Okay. Oh, these slides should be hidden. Apologies. As far as sampling strategy is concerned, we typically sample new users on day X because our gaming industry is mostly based on casual games, so we don't have players staying for a very long time. So sampling only new users works pretty well for us. And we just make sure that we have enough time in doing the sampling phase to make sure that we have enough people entering the groups. We only worry about the minimum number, so we tend to oversample. We just sample as much as we can during that period, and hopefully as long as we hit that 3,000 number per group, it's pretty fine. We also try to measure against how much risk we take, but we do have tons of players, so it's okay. One of the reasons we are using A/B testing is because we are lucky enough to have enough players in our game every day. That's why the number 3,000 players is not a big deal for us. So that will depend on your game and whatever you're working on. So for example, medical studies, you don't want to give, a placebo or a medication to more than like say 30 people. It's a bit risky. So different sample size, but in gaming, you can go pretty big. As far as the time window, this is a rule of the window we use. We take a sampling time and observation time plus 1 day. The reason is because of the global nature of our gaming business. We want to make sure that we have, for example, day 90 LTV, which means we have to sometimes wait for the final cohort to have the full 90 days. So that's just a rule of thumb. And of course, the sampling time on top. Now, this is the interesting part. So this is the part that's actually fully automated. So execution, that's what it was. But the analysis phase is what we automated most of. So because of the hypothesis we did before, we basically collect everything automatically. We can run a testing technique effectively automatically. And we know what the response KPIs we are because they were defined way so early at the definition phase. We can check those against our hypothesis, reach some kind of statistical conclusion, and then actually follow up with an impact analysis at the end. So a note on testing techniques, you'll hear a lot about this. Testing techniques, why do you only want 2 groups? Well, mostly it's because the techniques differ actually across the 2 groups versus multiple groups, also depending on sampling sizes. Here's some examples. T-test, Crossco-Wallace test, or ANOVA, you might have seen them if you've read about A/B testing. And the data team generally will decide what testing technique, or data scientists in this case, what test to run for you. We automate this actually using some rules. Just to give you an example of what we're talking about here, here's just a sample of what kind of testing techniques might exist within data science to do hypothesis testing with the type of circumstances that you might run into during an A/B test. For the most part, this is the reason why you wouldn't want to do this by hand. We just tend to automate it instead, and you can follow some rules for that. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Whoop. These were supposed to be hidden, and for some reason they're not. Once the analysis is done, what's really important is that you communicate a clear decision from the A/B test and make sure that you actually take action from it. So group A is statistically better than B, why, right? That's the statistical conclusion, but what does that actually mean? Well, we see no change in other KPIs, only changes in LTV. Therefore, we can assume that A is better than B or B is better than A. And then what kind of conclusion does that mean? Should B actually be deployed or A remains the same? A in this case being control, so that is no changes whatsoever. Okay, so I've been talking a bit quickly, and I'm going to go ahead and try to do an overview here. So what's important to consider with A/B testing is what are you testing and why? What do you want to detect? How do you sample look? How does your sample look like you want to test in? How big of a difference do you want to detect? What is your hypothesis? How do you want to test it? How do you analyze results? What is the conclusion? And what did the results tell you? And what are the action points? So that's what we covered generally, and I went really, really fast. So I apologize for that. But if you have any other questions, you can feel free to ask me later. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. That was a whistle-stop tour, wasn't it? That was brilliant.
I went really, really fast, and I do apologize for any of the chaos that might have ensued from that. And I'm happy to.
Oh no, chaos is good. The idea is to generate more questions than answers, isn't it? Isn't that the whole point of this? I thought it was I mean, A/B testing is something that's been used in the games industry for many, many years, and it's a really good method for people to get into. But is it possible to overtest? I mean, you talked about having a sort of a limit, but what happens if you overtest? And more importantly, how do you know when you get to that point where the data sort of tips over into being less useful than positive?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So it is very easy to overtest, especially when you have an automated process like this. People have a tendency of almost over relying on it, right? This magic bullet thing with A/B testing, and actually, in a way, this one, that's why that question making process is so important, right? You actually lead with why you're doing the test in the first place, and oftentimes what you'll find is that stakeholders will just go, actually, I didn't need a test. I'm just going to go do it, right? Because they'll think it through. And that's one of the reasons why we templated it. If they cannot fill in everything, they don't need a test. If they can fill in everything, then they might need a test. I think it's important to have a special version of that for each, for each company. You have a different level of tolerance and a different level of analysis paralysis, let's say. And so what I've showed you is what we have done at our maturity level with our data analytics stack. It may not be the one that you use for you. It's important to discuss A/B tests. That's what I say. And as long as you discuss it, you should be able to mitigate most over-analysis on A/B tests.
Does that also count? And you talked about, fortunately, you have lots of players, so a 3,000 sample is good. Some companies just setting out will have nowhere near that and won't have the opportunity to get anywhere near those kinds of numbers. Is it still valid if it's a few hundred people? Is it still, as long as you have the right sort of methodology and checks, is that possible? Or is there a minimum below which you should never consider doing it?
That's a really good question, and that depends on a very complicated set of maths that I will not try to get into today.
That's another 20 minutes. Here we go.
Yeah, that's another 20 minutes. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can try to use something like a power function. There's a power test, power mathematics. Sorry, not power function. I'm trying to find the right word. Maybe Peter can help me here. If you write it in the chat for me. But you do a power calculation to see if there's a power in there. However, that's the thing about gaming. So let's take it back to game up topics for a minute. One of the biggest advantages of gaming is that we have so much of it. You almost never run into too little data problems, right? You never run into it. So rely on that. That's how we do it. We just count on that. And 3,000 players in this case is a small drop in the bucket for large games, right? So just sample 3,000 players. It's like less than 1%, right? And you have plenty of people. That's the advantage of gaming, and that's one of the reasons why A/B testing shows up so often in gaming. So I would just say, in games, don't worry about it too much. If you're running into too small of a sample sizes, then worry about it. And then you can use things like power calculations.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense. A question from one of our attendees is, are there any platforms or solutions that you recommend for A/B testing? I think you name-checked a couple of platforms, didn't you? Do you mind just going through those again, if that's all right?
Well, that's a very complicated question to answer because I will be honest, they don't always work out well. I will say that don't worry too much about the technology. I would say if you want to learn about A/B testing, the first step is to make sure that you're good at asking those questions. That is the most expensive and the most difficult part about A/B testing. And you can do that without any set of technology. Once you have mastered that, then you can start looking for the technology, and then you can find a technology that suits the way you ask questions, right? And what kind of questions you ask. That being said, I'll give you a quick idea of what kind of landscape you might be looking at. So Firebase, for example, does support A/B testing kind of out of the box. You also have third parties like Leapsum, not Leapsum, sorry, that's the wrong word. Leanplum, who actually began their first CRM offering was A/B testing on CRM platforms. And other CRM competitors like Braze, which is what we use here, you can also do it with. Other services like Azure PlayFab, I don't know if you guys know it, but it's a back-end service for games. Also sometimes support something like that. We built something custom on top of PlayFab as well as using Braze. So it kind of depends. The technology is not necessarily the hard part. So yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for that detailed answer and plenty of guidance there for our audience today. Now, talking of detailed questions, I'm going to send you to the Q&A. As a nice question in there for you, which looks way too technical for me to have a look at.
Right.
So good luck with some of that language in there. And thank you very much, Chris, for joining us today.
Happy to. Thank you.
And finally, last but by no means least, Marco from Pinnacle.
Hello, everybody.
Trading director there. Marco, how you doing? You all right?
I'm all right. How about yourself? Very interesting so far.
Very well, thank you very much. Yeah, enjoying this. Oh, I can see your slides. That's perfect.
We're ready to rock and roll. All right, I'll be talking about esports. Little words before because it's going to come up later. My background and my profession is in gambling. I work for a bookmaker. However, this talk is not so much about the bookmaking aspects of it. It is more about the esports, and hopefully I can make the bridge to how we use data in esports and what esports actually is for us and why it is interesting, hopefully for you to learn a little bit about esports. In general, I think esports and video games are very different things, at least from myself and the industry. When we talk about esports, we actually talk about games that have a professional scene attached to it, meaning there's people who make their living playing these games as a profession. That's the definition for an esport. There's plenty of video games around, and obviously the video game market is massive, but the esports market in particular is of interest to me, and it's also an area that has been growing exponentially for many, many years and is probably poised to overcome traditional sports in a lot of areas. So let's talk quickly about what are the esports titles that we talk about? How does the esports landscape look like? So the first real popular esports was StarCraft. StarCraft had famously, and especially in Korea, and I think there were 2 TV channels that showed StarCraft matches nonstop. To this day, Korea is one of the leading nations when it comes to esports. Korea has embraced esports at a level that is still unique in the world. However, other nations have caught up. StarCraft is classic real-time strategy RTS game. We have the MOBAs, multiplayer online battle arenas. Peter mentioned that he worked for Riot. Riot produces League of Legends, one of the most popular MOBAs, and the other is Dota. You have a bunch of first-person shooter. The one that's really important here is Counter-Strike, made by the same company that also produces Dota. The company is called Valve. And then you have a bunch of other esports: Fortnite, Street Fighter, and some racing games. You have the sport games, but the main 3 titles in esports are actually League of Legends, Counter-Strike, and Dota 2. Those is basically the vast majority of the professional players are inside those 3 esports. Esports has grown fantastically. This slide goes to 2018. I actually think the pictures on the right side tell them more interesting stories. Those are 3 pictures from the League of Legends World Championships. And you see that in 2011, it was basically a mom and pop shop operation, a few people on their laptops gaming it up. They had a small audience of 30 people. And you see where they are 2016 and 2018. the production now are at a level that's almost unparalleled. They do rival production values of the Super Bowl. They do rival production value of any major sports event. Esports is massive. Esports is growing. The prize money in esports is growing. The investments in esports is growing. It is outstanding. I'm going to just ever so quickly, why does betting matter? Betting matters in the sense that betting is a good indicator of public interest. Betting does not create its own interest. Basically, betting is just a reflection of public interest. So we have been, with the company that I'm with, we have been taking 15 million bets in esports, in 2019, obviously a lot more now since I talked about exponential growth. But you see that, even companies like the 76ers, a big NBA organization, have adopted esports. And by now, I think there's not a major soccer or football club that has not had an esports division. Esports is to come. And, sorry, I should have deleted this slide. So the interesting thing is about why esports is so prominent is actually that the esports customer is a different generation. With this slide, I try to simplify, obviously, how does an esports customer consume it? He watches VODs, YouTube, Twitch, or whatever from the NASCAR games. That's his thing. He reads Reddit, Twitter, Discord. They don't use the traditional media to consume the news. They have esports podcasts, and obviously they play in parallel. And I think it's just a very different audience if you compare it to a soccer fan, a tennis fan. The level of engagement that you have with esports is a lot closer. And there's a lot more esports. The esports has a lot more content than any other areas. Esports is truly 24/7, often 365. If you think about, if you're a fan of Manchester United, you might see him once a week, maybe not even once a week. Esports, you can see your guy almost playing daily. It's quite a different level of involvement. The esports prize pools, I think, are really, really interesting, especially if you compare them to traditional sports. Wimbledon is one of the highest prize pools in all of sports as a singular event. This event is an esports event, the biggest esports event. In 2018 was a 25 million. It exceeded 34 million now in prize money, and it dwarfs almost every other event that exists in sports history. And if you combine the esports prize pool, you see exactly this exponential growth that I referred to, that esports is really going through the roof. More events, bigger events, more money is being poured in. By now, there's not a single major brand that has not done sponsorship in esports. MasterCard, Coca-Cola, I named a few here, but you go every level. You talk about Mercedes, you talk about BMW, they're all in there, all with varying success. And part of the problem that they have is that a traditional brand often has problems targeting esports guys because they don't speak the language of the Generation Z, and come over as phony and fake towards an esports customer. Oh, sorry, what did I do now? Space. All right. When we talk about betting, and we want to talk about esports, and this is where data comes in. Obviously, one of the questions is about integrity. By integrity issues, we talk about what people commonly refer to as match fixing. Match fixing does not necessarily need to be done by a third party that is investing bribe money to get the referee or the players on board to do something. These are often young players. They are in the early 20s. They're adults, but they're not really understanding that they're now in a serious profession. So they might just joke with their friends and talk about this. So we use a plethora of algorithms to understand how does an average esports game perform from a betting point of view, and what are the standard deviations. And what are 3 standard deviation events basically? So we really try to put it on a bell curve and just group it up and understand what are the 3 sigma events that we can identify and to have a high level of confidence that this game was not played on an even playing ground. We are not an enforcement agency or can actually do the investigation ourselves, but what we are doing is there is an organization in esports, which is ESIC, which is an Esports Integrity Coalition, which was founded by Blizzard mainly, and the ESL they building, which is a tournament series in Cologne and Northern Europe, and we try to put some money in and put some people in to help with match fixing. We have a lot of community members reporting things to us. We try to do education and try to help people understand how the role of a bookmaker can actually help identify match fixing and can put some context around why does match fixing occur and why is the bookmaker maybe not the problem or the solution to it. It's a little bit naive to assume that match fixing is something that occurs because of bookmaking. Match fixing will always occur. In bookmakers in itself, we are the ones who actually suffer the most through match fixing, aside from the fans who are being robbed of the experience, but we suffer monetary consequences. And in addition, we lose fans who actually get disheartened by match fixing. So the process that we do for match fixing analysis is a combination of algorithms and human intervention. Basically, we let the humans flag events, then we use algorithms to actually detect, have we seen this betting pattern before? Have we seen these customers bet before? Have they bet on other matches that were flagged as suspicious? So we're trying to create an evidence trail around suspicious betting, which is usually quite good evidence. I have worked myself with law enforcement agencies in Holland, in the UK. I've worked with tournament organizers. I've worked with game manufacturers to help educate them to see how they can, what tools they can provide us or in general to help combat match fixing. It's a massive endeavor that the entire industry is working towards. Really interesting, lots of data you have to crunch. You also obviously have to make sure that you don't whistleblow somebody who is innocent. So you have to be very careful and very conscious. Yeah, but it's a big topic and very interesting from a data analytic point of view. I mentioned briefly, esports is now on the verge of surpassing traditional sports. Esports already has surpassed many traditional sports. Esports for us is our fourth biggest sport. Which is like, to give perspective, we offer around 55 different sports, from tennis, baseball, basketball, American football, you name it, and esports is number 4. Esports is an Eldorado for data, because for sport analytics fans, it actually combines almost perfect data information, since it's computer generated, with the uncertainty of sport events. Really an interesting and sexy topic. Many people who work for us actually love specifically working in esports, because the data is clean in some sense, compared to traditional data for sports that often is hand tracked, or if it's tracked, it might not be as accurate. Esports is clean. Esports is ever evolving, which is interesting. Rules in esports change constantly. So in esports, like a League of Legends, for example, every 6-8 months, there's a major patch which would change the rules dramatically. Like I always try to give the example, imagine that football would be played with 2 balls for 15 minutes. Like, what is the impact of that? How does the game differ? Quite a lot of interesting analysis can be done around this. Here's a number of viewerships. Right, the Super Bowl in 2018, I believe, was watched by 100 million viewers. League of Legends was viewed by 200 million viewers. The audience is massive. There's so many people who love esports and who grow up with esports, and we see the switch now. There's a generation of people who are now in the mid-30s who grew up with esports, and they don't want to watch traditional sports anymore. They want to watch esports on the weekend, despite not having the time anymore to play in it. It's not so interesting. One other thing that I think might be very interesting for this crowd is one of the main problems we try to solve with Tournament Integrity is actually live odds for esports, which has to do with we integrate and consume live data feeds from tournament providers, from game providers, and we try to build machine learning models on top of it that try to predict the outcome of an esports game given the current state of the game. So it's almost like, not almost, it's identical to modeling football, basketball, and tennis. We just do it with esports, which is quite more complex. Esports has a lot of things going on. If you think about soccer, football, and not that many things matter in that. In football, the time matters, maybe the red cards, the goals, maybe the corners, but that's around it. In esports, you have a lot more factors. It's very multifaceted. You have to break it down. The data situation in esports, while being better on the one side, is worse on the other side because of these patches. So every 6 months or whatever big patch comes in, that takes away a lot of the prior analysis validity, and you have to rerun your algorithms. So it's quite a lot of fun for us to try to keep up with this. The human plays a big role in it. The human intuition is actually what we use at the first step to try to figure out, okay, well, we look at this new patch and we try to understand how did it change the game and what do we think is the most likely outcome. And then we try to do data analysis to see if we can find evidence or counter evidence for our beliefs. I try to give a quick overview now. I can go much deeper, but I hope this gives you a quick overview about esports betting landscapes and why esports might be an interesting field for data scientists to stick their neck into it.
Marco, thank you very much for that. It's a really interesting, the difference that you're suggesting between followers of traditional sports and then looking at esports, how, a lot of people, before a sporting event happens, they rely on instinct, on gut, sentiment plays a lot in it. Are you basically saying that doesn't happen in esports, or is it less of a factor and the data sort of takes over?
A little bit in between. So part of the problem is that the franchises in esports don't have the history of the franchises in traditional sports. Right? Manchester United exists for, 100 years. An esports franchise, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years if you have a long one. So you don't have this loyalty. You definitely don't have generation loyalty where your grandfather was a fan of the Arsenal and now you are a fan of Arsenal. So that doesn't exist in the first place. That's a big part. Esports is also much more fluid. The rules of esports are so different now than 5 years ago, than even 2 years ago, while the rules of football or soccer are almost the same. I mean, what did we add in the last 50 years? VAR for football, that was the big addition now. But that's it. The rules are the same. Rules for tennis are basically the same. Rules for every sport are basically the same. Esports is not like this. Secondly, there's a lot more sites which produce good data analysis around esports, mainly because it's a little bit easier because the data is clean. Like to get good soccer data, it's a lot harder to do. You have to, baseball has it. There's a big data science community around baseball specifically. But in other sports, it might not be as good.
But that's interesting. If there's more data and the data is cleaner and more reliable, there's less opportunity to stand out from the crowd and be different, isn't there? Is this not? That sounds a bit counterintuitive to me.
Well, it isn't, right? On the one hand, like the people who are interested, they can delve deep, I mean, there is the average esports fan is a casual consumer. I'm not trying to say he's a data cruncher. However, he's a casual consumer who grew up with the internet and is consuming things on the internet. So he's not going to a pub with his mates and watch it there, right? He's a guy who wants to sit at home, play the game himself, then the professionals play, and then maybe after he plays himself again. So he's much more in tune with the game is being actually played. It's just a different relationship that they have.
I think it's taken a lot of people a while to understand why people would want to watch other people playing games. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, isn't it?
The example I always give is that let's say you're a fan of let's say Messi. Messi is your guy. Now imagine you could watch Messi practice every single day, and you have a GoPro camera from Messi. And not only do you have the GoPro camera, Messi also speaks to you. And it's fascinating, this idea that now you can see how Messi trains in the gym, how he trains the shots, how he thinks about it, how he tackles the issues. And with any professional esports player, you have this direct relationship and this direct access through Twitch, through other platforms where you can interact with them. They might even talk to you.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. It is a really good way of getting closer to those individuals and teams. In fact, a question from PT about, is there a good source of tracking player and team performance?
we do a ton of work ourselves, quite obviously. And it's on, the data in esports is actually very, very expensive compared to other sports, because there's a monopoly, like only one company actually owns the data, right? Which is interesting. So they can charge a price. I don't think there's top data sources in that sense that you can use. I wouldn't know that. I mean, there are some elo tables, like tracking the teams, but I think that has to be that's some surrounding stuff that has been built. I mean, many websites try. Gosu Gamers is a very popular website that used to have it big, and there's others that try to build up a community around it.
It's fabulous, and I mean, you've opened our eyes today to the value of data in this important emerging sector. It's a really good example of the data-driven world that we live in. So thank you very much for sharing your slides with us today, Marco, and I will distribute them to everyone afterwards so that they can have a look through them. And it just leaves me now to say a really big thank you to our speakers today, to David, Una, Peter, Simon, Chris, and also Marco. To remind you, and Una's posted in the chat, that there is a social meetup starting 1 minute ago. So I'm going to talk for another 30 seconds. And I mean, then when you enter the room, you'll be, a crowd of people around you. It'll be lovely to enter when there's already people there, rather than being the first person there. There's a link in the chat anyway to go and join that little social meetup and go and have a chat with some other people and make some new valuable contacts. But most of all, I wanted to thank you all for joining us today, for listening to these interesting talks and joining us for the Hub Crawl. So I wish you a very good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sam. Right, cool. I'm going to jump onto the channel and open up. But thank you so much for getting it up and running and making it.
All right. Well, I'll come and join you in a minute, but we'll do a catch up later this week. All right. Cheers.
Fantastic. Brilliant.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.